Hello, this video is a video which is part of the Asthma Spotlight Podcast series, and I would suggest that you have a listen to the podcasts, search for Asthma Spotlight, and you'll find it on Apple and Spotify and a number of other platforms. Have a listen to those podcasts and then watch the video, or watch this first and then listen to the podcasts. I think you'll find that the two complement each other. So in this talk, I'm going to be talking about using peak flow meters to monitor your asthma control. This is aimed at people with asthma or people who are caring for somebody with asthma, and my thoughts are my own, and this is not intended to be medical advice. It's intended to help you to monitor your own asthma, to tell when to call for help. Now, I would suggest that you pause at this disclaimer statement and read through it very carefully before watching the rest of the video. So, peak flow meters in asthma. I'll talk a little bit about asthma. As I said, there's much more detail in the audio podcasts that I've done, so have a listen to those. I'll mention asthma attacks, and then we'll talk about finding your own best peak flow readings and how to do that, and then the uses and patterns of peak flow. So how can you tell when your asthma is going out of control? Now, asthma causes inflammation or irritation of your air passages. Now, this is an ongoing process that smolders on in the background all the time. Asthma is not an acute condition which just comes on suddenly and then goes away. Asthma is a chronic, ongoing disease which flares up from time to time. And when asthma flares up, you get symptoms which include coughing, shortness of breath, chest tightness, and wheezing. Now, wheezing is a whistling noise which comes from your chest and not from your throat. And it's usually more obvious when you breathe out. So the asthma inflammation causes three things to happen. It causes swellings of the walls of the air passages in your lungs. It causes phlegm or mucus to collect inside the air passages. And it also causes tightening or spasm of the air passage walls. And this spasm or tightening results from twitchiness or increased irritability of the air passage walls. And these three processes together, which result from asthma inflammation, all reduce the amount of oxygen that you can breathe into your lungs. Now, you're probably aware that oxygen keeps us alive, so it's very important to have wide open air passages so that you can get oxygen into your body. Now, asthma attacks might happen very suddenly, but very often they happen slowly, and this can happen over a period of days or weeks. And so it's really helpful if you can tell, if you can tell when your asthma is going out of control so that you can prevent attacks from coming on. Now, there are three ways to tell if your asthma is out of control, and that's by increasing symptoms. So if you find you're coughing or wheezing or getting short of breath, that means that your asthma is probably going out of control. Now, if you need to use more of your reliever medication, and that's usually in the form of a blue inhaler, that also means that your asthma is going out of control. And then finally, you can do measurements to test to see how tight your air passages are and how badly controlled your asthma is. Now, I've dealt with these measurements in the last asthma podcast, so I'd suggest have a listen to podcast number 7 and number 8. And in this video, I'm going to focus on lung function measurements, in particular, peak flow measurements. Now, peak flow is a blowing test, and it tests to see how fast you can blow air out of your lungs. Peak flow is one of the two lung function tests that we use. The other one is called spirometry. So we're going to focus on peak flow. I've shown an example of a peak flow meter. These meters are cheap and easy to use at home. Now, there are lots of different peak flow meters on the market. So peak flow meters can be used to diagnose asthma, And that's to diagnose new onset asthma, i.e. when you first start getting it. And it can also be used to diagnose when your asthma is going out of control, and we call that an asthma attack or an exacerbation or an asthma flare-up. Now the peak flow meter can help you tell how tight your air passages are, and in other words, how severe an asthma attack is if you're having one. Peak flow meters can also help you to monitor your asthma in an ongoing way. So it can help you to detect when your asthma is going out of control at an early stage. And remember, I said that asthma attacks can come on slowly. So an asthma attack might take days or weeks to develop. And if you're measuring your peak flow, you can tell when that is happening. Now, the other use of a peak flow meter, and in my view, this is one of the most important uses, that's to tell if an asthma attack is improving and getting better, or if it is getting worse. And this is very, very helpful information. So after you've been discharged from hospital or sent home from your GP or your doctor after treatment for an asthma attack, a peak flow meter can help you to tell when it's safe to stop using the emergency cortisone tablets that you've been prescribed, or if your asthma is getting worse, the peak flow meter readings can tell you whether you need to call for help again or not. So, as I said, there are lots of different peak flow meters on the market, and these peak flow meters will give different measurements. So if you have your peak flow measured by one doctor on one occasion and by another doctor on another, or if you're measured in hospital or in the ED, emergency department, using different meters, you can't really compare those measurements because the different meters are not 100% comparable. In fact, the readings can vary by quite a lot. So it's best to have your own peak flow meter. Now, if you've got your own peak flow meter, what you need to find out is what your normal peak flow reading is. Now, the way to do that is to take a number of peak flow readings when your asthma is well controlled. It's clearly not useful to do this when your asthma is out of control because it's not going to provide a normal or best peak flow reading. So get a chart, either a graph like I've shown here, or just a piece of paper with days of the week and times of the day on it. Measure your peak flow, the best of 3 readings, every morning and every evening, and write the best readings, that's the highest readings, down on your chart. Have a look at those readings and determine what the average best peak flow reading is. And in this case, you can see that this person's best peak flow is about 500. Okay, so you know your best peak flow. Now you need to know some levels where you need to take action. So there are 3 levels which are important. First of all, in children, we take a 90% level. In adults, we take an 80% level of the best reading. Now, to calculate these percentages, you divide your best by 10 and then multiply by either 9 or 8. And then draw a line on your peak flow chart, because this green line, so remember it's 80% for adults and adolescents, 90% for children. Now, this green line tells you the level that your best peak flow should be at. So if you're measuring your peak flow, it should be above that green line. And that would mean that your peak flow readings are normal and your asthma is controlled. The next reading you want to measure and establish is a 60% reading. Now, draw a line on your chart. And if your peak flow is heading down towards 60% or going below 60%, you're having an acute asthma attack. If your reading drops below 30%, then this is an emergency and you need emergency help. So draw a line for the 60% line and the 30% line. And if you're measuring your peak flow and it's dropping down below your green reading, your upper best reading, then you know you're heading for trouble and your asthma is going out of control. If it's going down towards the 60% line or below that towards the 30% line, you need to contact your doctor or asthma trained nurse urgently. So this is how a peak flow meter can help you to tell when your asthma is going out of control. Now, as I said, there are lots of different peak flow meters, and this example I'm showing is a meter which enables you to put little markers in to give your upper best level, your 60% level when you need to worry, and your 30% level when you need to urgently get emergency help. Now, there are electronic peak flow meters available, and these work together with smartphones. They're a bit more expensive, but if you have those, your recordings will be recorded on your smartphone. Now, I'm going to show you 3 patterns to watch out for when you're recording your peak flow. So the 3 patterns which tell you that your asthma is uncontrolled are, first of all, a wide variation in your peak flow readings, morning dips, or where your peak flow drops down suddenly, usually in the morning, and then the third pattern is dropping readings. So this slide is an example of somebody whose peak flow is demonstrating wide variations from morning to evening. And you can see quite clearly by looking at the graph that this person's asthma is out of control. Now, his best ever peak flow is 520. So 80% of his best is 420, 60% of best is 320, and 30% of his best reading is 160. Now, his peak flow readings are changing from 270 to 520. So his lowest reading is close to his 60%, or is below his 60% mark. So this person is clearly in trouble and needs to consult his doctor. Now, you can also calculate variation, and I've shown how this graph would demonstrate that this person's got 49% variation in peak flow, and more than 20% variation indicates poor asthma control. So 49% variation in peak flow from morning to evening or day to day clearly indicates that your peak flow is out of control. Now, I wanted to highlight something, and that is a lot of people think that they can just measure their peak flow now and again. So you measure it once a month or twice a month. And in this graph, I'm just illustrating somebody who's measured his peak flow just now and again. So you can see, if you look at those readings, they are around about the 500 mark. So if those were the only readings that this person had taken, he would think that his peak flow was well controlled, and therefore his asthma was well controlled. However, if you look at the whole chart where this person's done the readings morning and evening and from day to day, you get a completely different picture. So you do need to take peak flow from time to time on a regular basis, because asthma is a condition that comes and goes. It flares up and down. So you can be 100% fit one day, and the next your asthma could be completely out of control. And so it's not useful to just do the odd reading here and there. And that's why I say in this talk and previous talks that I've done, if you're going to visit your doctor or your asthma trained nurse for a routine checkup, take a chart of your peak flow readings with you so that they can see what's been happening, not just on the time that you do the consultation, but what's been happening in the weeks before you consult. And you'll provide much more information for your healthcare professionals to advise you. You might be somebody who prefers to write numbers down on tables, and this is fine. This is another way of keeping track of your peak flow readings. And so in this example, which was a chart of a child, I've done a calculation. This child's best peak flow is 250. By just looking at the chart, you can see the best readings and the lowest readings. His 90% level was 225, 60% is 150, and his 30% level is 75. So if his readings, as in this chart, are dropping down towards his 60% level, then this child and his parents should be seeking medical advice because his asthma is clearly going out of control. You'll see, if you're very observant, you'll see there is a reading of 170 higher up there, but I tend to ignore the low readings in the first few days of teaching somebody how to use a peak flow meter. And if you take the readings later on as more accurate because the person's learned how to use their peak flow meter by that stage, you'll get a better picture of asthma control. Now you can calculate the variability, and this is one of the ways of doing it. You take the highest reading, subtract the lowest reading from that, and you divide by the highest, and you multiply by 100, and you get to 28% variation. Now, variation in peak flow above 20% is regarded as an indication that your asthma is out of control. So the next pattern we're going to talk about are these dips, so-called morning dips in peak flow. You can see in this chart of this young boy that his peak flow has dipped down very suddenly, very sharp dip. I must say, when I first saw these readings, I got quite a shock because this child was having these sudden severe asthma attacks without realizing they were happening because he hadn't been measuring his peak flow. So you can see the readings are plummeting down, and then as he implements his self-management plan and takes more medication, the readings increase. So this boy's best peak flow was in the region of 550, and you can see that by looking at the readings at the top of the chart. So his best readings when he's well are about 550. So his 80% level was 440, 60% is 330, and you'll see that his readings drop down to about 330. So he's in serious trouble when those readings are dropping down to that level. Fortunately, with his self-management, he's able to get himself out of trouble by treating those attacks himself. So this is an example of the morning dips. Now, the other example of peak flow patterns that indicate possible danger signals are when the readings are going down and down. So the readings are dropping. Here's an example of a patient that I looked after many years ago, and this man came to see me after he'd had an attack, in fact, and told me the story. So you can see in his chart that he was measuring his readings, and he was taking them before and after he was using his reliever medication, and that's why you can see a difference between the red dots and the black dots. Now he was worried because his readings were tending to go down. And he went to see his doctor, and unfortunately, he didn't see his regular doctor who knew him very well. And this doctor who he saw advised him not to worry. And unfortunately, his attack developed soon after that, and he ended up needing emergency treatment a few days later. So if you're doing peak flow readings and you know what your normal pattern is like, when you go and see your healthcare professional, it's worth explaining what you know about your own asthma, because very often you yourself know your own asthma better than anybody else does. And if you're worried, it's important to convey that message to your health carer. So to summarize, if you're doing your peak flow readings and they're staying steady and staying level around about your best level, then your asthma is well controlled. And I've shown that in the green box up at the top. And then there are 3 patterns of abnormal peak flow. And these are the patterns where you need to worry about your asthma. So if your readings are going up and down, that's one pattern to worry about. if your readings are suddenly dipping down, especially if they're dropping down towards your 60% or 30% level. That's another pattern to worry about. And the third pattern is if your readings are dropping down slowly. You need to seek medical advice. So, finally, these are a couple of charts demonstrating the other use for a peak flow meter. If you've had an asthma attack, it's very hard to tell when your asthma attack is over. And so it's hard to tell when to stop using the emergency treatment that's been advised by your own doctor. And by using a peak flow chart, you can see when your readings are increasing. And as long as they increase and then reach a level, a plateau where they level out, then you've got a good idea that your attack is getting better and is over. Now, you use this information together with the other information that I spoke about in the podcasts, and that's why I suggest have a listen to that, because in the podcasts I have focused on other ways you can tell when your asthma is going out of control, and that includes your symptoms and your response to your emergency reliever medication. So I hope this has been helpful, and I hope I've been able to convince you to get a peak flow meter either from your own doctor or to buy one yourself. So in summary, peak flow measurements tell you how tight your air passages are. And a number of people can't tell how tight their air passages are, and they can't rely on symptoms alone. So the peak flow meter, once you've got one, it's important to find your own best ever reading, which is your own normal reading. The charts that you get together with peak flow meters are not very helpful because they don't tell you what your normal reading is. They'll give you a range of readings which might be very wide. So they might say that your reading could be between 300 and 600, depending on your age, your gender, and your ethnicity, and your height. And so it's really important to find out what your best peak flow is using your own meter. The meter readings will help you to identify patterns which would signal asthma attacks, and they also help you to identify whether your asthma is running along smoothly and normally. The meter readings will also help tell when an asthma attack is over, and to help your doctor advise you, it would be helpful to do a reading, best of 3 readings every morning and evening, a few weeks before you have a routine review appointment with your doctor. Thank you very much for your attention. Now,